"You're scaring the kids with that skin. Cover up or leave." Karen's voice sliced through the laughter at the neighborhood pool like a razor through calm water. Dozens of heads turned. My wife Maya sat still on the lounger, her toned arms resting beside her, burned scars clearly visible from shoulder to elbow, glinting under the sun. She didn't flinch. She didn't snap back. She just adjusted her sunglasses and slowly turned her head. "I earned every inch of this skin, lady. You want to talk about scary? Try crawling through a firestorm for a stranger's kid." Silence followed. It was the kind of silence that made even the splash of pool water seem too loud. But Karen wasn't the type to shut up when she was already 2 feet deep in her own mess. The day had started so peacefully, with clear skies and just enough breeze to keep the summer heat tolerable. Maya and I had decided to spend the afternoon at the community pool, something she rarely had time for anymore since being promoted to captain. She wasn't just any firefighter. She was the woman who led from the front, the one who never hesitated to enter burning buildings while others waited for backup. But today, she was just trying to be someone's wife, just a woman enjoying the sun, trying to reclaim a bit of the peace she'd once known before firestorms left their fingerprints across her skin. Karen, of course, wasn't interested in peace. She was interested in optics. The self-appointed HOA enforcer of all things pleasant, Karen strutted around like she had been elected queen of the pool, clipboard in one hand, fake tan flaking off her neck. She was the type who probably practiced power poses in the mirror every morning while sipping cucumber water from a mason jar labeled Boss Babe. Her eyes locked onto Maya the moment we stepped onto the pool deck. It wasn't the swimsuit that offended her. It wasn't the way Maya laughed easily with the lifeguards she once trained in emergency rescue. No, it was the scars, angry patches of pink and brown that trailed down from Maya's shoulder like branches of lightning caught in flesh. Scars that told a story Karen didn't want to hear. She hovered like a wasp for 10 full minutes before making her move, approaching like she was about to perform a service to mankind. "Excuse me," Karen had started, putting just enough fake concern in her voice to sound nauseating. "Some of the mothers are feeling uncomfortable. It's nothing personal, but your marks are very visible, and a few children got upset." Maya had looked up slowly, like a lion being woken from a nap by a particularly loud mosquito. "You mean my scars?" Karen gave a tight-lipped smile, the kind reserved for photo ops or police stops. "It's just that some things are better left private, especially in family spaces. Maybe you could cover up." I could feel Maya weighing her response, her hands, normally steady as stone even in a 5-alarm blaze, curled slightly as she breathed in. Then she spoke, calm, direct, and loud enough for the entire pool to hear. "These scars are from the Lakeman apartment fire last summer. 3rd floor collapse while I was carrying out 2 unconscious tenants. I got them saving lives, and if that upsets your tanning session, I'd recommend a different pool." Karen wasn't expecting that. Her face twitched, and for a second, she looked like she might back off. But instead, she doubled down. "That doesn't give you the right to visually traumatize kids. This is a shared space, and you should have some decency." A teenager floating nearby with a soda can said, "Didn't she save a baby in that fire too?" Maya didn't confirm or deny. She just stood up, towering over Karen even without trying. My wife wasn't aggressive, but she didn't need to be. Her presence alone, forged from fire and grit, commanded attention. Karen stormed off in a huff, muttering something about filing a complaint with the HOA. The crowd slowly dispersed, but the damage had been done. Maya sat back down without a word and returned to her book. But I knew her silence wasn't peace. It was restraint. Later that evening, we received an email from the HOA board notifying us that a complaint had been filed citing visual disturbance and public discomfort. They said a vote was being considered to update community pool decorum rules. Maya read it once, then deleted it. "Let her play her games," she muttered. "I'm not hiding who I am for anyone." That night, I found her standing in front of the mirror, running her fingers over the scars like reading a story in Braille. I asked if she was okay, and she shrugged. "You know the funny part," she said. The fire didn't hurt as much as hearing someone say I'm disturbing to look at. I didn't know what to say. What do you say to a woman who's risked everything for others, only to be treated like a sideshow attraction in her own neighborhood? But even in her pain, she smiled and said, "This isn't over. If Karen wants a fight, she just picked the wrong match to strike." The next morning, the pool was strangely quiet. Karen wasn't there, but her absence felt temporary, like the calm before the next blow-up. A few neighbors approached Maya to offer quiet apologies, saying they didn't agree with what happened. One even brought lemonade. Maya thanked them but said little. She was saving her words for something bigger. I didn't know what she was planning yet, but I knew that look in her eyes, the one I'd seen right before she ran into a collapsing warehouse without backup. The look that meant something was coming, something fierce, something righteous, and when it came, Karen wasn't going to see it coming. The next week rolled in like a heat wave, tense and dry and ready to spark at any moment. The neighborhood, which once buzzed with cheerful poolside chatter and evening barbecues, had grown unusually quiet. Conversations slowed whenever Maya and I walked by, and smiles were replaced with a kind of stiff nod that said more about guilt than friendliness. No one wanted to admit it, but Karen's complaint had shaken the community, not because people supported her, but because they didn't stop her. That kind of silence was just as loud as her voice. The HOA board, desperate to avoid looking weak under pressure, scheduled a special meeting. They called it a decorum standards discussion, but we all knew what it was really about. The agenda was conveniently vague, with phrases like appearance impact, community values, and the ever-infamous family comfort. Maya and I attended, of course, but when we walked into the cramped rec center meeting room, it was clear the room had already chosen sides. Karen was posted near the front row like she owned the place, fanning herself dramatically and giving smug looks to every board member who made eye contact. The HOA president, Nathan, cleared his throat and opened with a monotone welcome, already sweating under the fluorescent lights. I counted only 19 people in attendance out of nearly 100 homes in the neighborhood. The setup wasn't democratic. It was designed for a fast, quiet power play. Karen knew how to stack a room when she wanted something passed. They opened the floor to community members, and Karen wasted no time. She stood with a folder thick enough to hold a manifesto and launched into a speech that could have won her a petty Oscar. She talked about maintaining neighborhood standards, about how children shouldn't be exposed to distressing visuals, and how appearance does matter in public spaces. She never used Maya's name, but it didn't matter. Her words dripped with implication. Then, like a bad magician pulling rabbits from the wrong hat, she pulled out an anonymous survey she claimed to have conducted. According to her, 72% of respondents felt uncomfortable with visual disfigurements at the pool. She didn't show the surveys. She didn't name the respondents. She just waved that folder around like it was law. When she sat back down, people clapped, not many, but enough to make my stomach turn. Then came the vote. 3 board members leaned in and whispered, trying to look impartial. Nathan finally looked up, cleared his throat, and called the motion. Should the HOA add a clause allowing temporary restriction from shared amenities based on disturbing or discomforting appearance to the majority? My fists clenched. It wasn't even thinly veiled. This was targeted harassment hidden under the ugliest mask of community concern. One member voted no immediately. A younger guy named Durek who looked like he couldn't believe this was even being debated. Another followed him in voting yes. Karen's friend, of course. The third hesitated, eyes flicking to the room, then slowly raised her hand. That made 2. Nathan looked conflicted, glancing toward Maya, then at Karen, then at the small but vocal group in the room. After a few seconds that felt like years, he voted yes. 3-2. Motion passed. Maya didn't say a word. She just stood up, walked calmly to the exit, and left the room without a backward glance. I followed her out, but she didn't stop walking until we reached the car. When I finally caught up, she was already in the passenger seat staring ahead. "They actually did it," I said, still stunned. "I knew they would," she replied, her voice flat. "People like Karen never win through reason. They win through fear and silence." I started the car, but we didn't drive off. Instead, She pulled out her phone and opened her notes app. I could see her typing something fast, calculated. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Planning," she said. She thinks she silenced me, but she just gave me a bigger audience. That night, she stayed up until almost 3 o'clock in the morning. I offered to help, but she told me to sleep, said she needed to work alone. The next morning, when I came down for coffee, she was already in uniform, clean and pressed, her captain's insignia gleaming. "I'm visiting the station," she said. "Might make a few other stops." What she didn't tell me was that she also stopped by the local news outlet, where a young reporter named Jade had been covering public service stories. Maya shared her story, showed the HOA's email, and even printed Karen's survey language for reference. By noon, the reporter had posted a teaser on the station's social page with the headline, "Fire Captain Barred from Pool Over Burn Scars. Local HOA Under Fire." The story exploded like a propane tank at a barbecue. Comments rolled in from all directions, calling the HOA's decision disgusting, shameful, and an attack on heroes. Veterans groups, burn survivor forums, firefighter unions, they all began sharing the post. Within hours, Maya had received over 100 messages of support, including one from the mayor's office. Karen, of course, didn't stay quiet. She fired back online with a tone-deaf post about community safety and the emotional well-being of children that only made things worse. Screenshots of her comments went viral, and before she knew it, she became the unintentional mascot for HOA discrimination. The HOA board tried to clean it up, but the damage was done. Even the two who voted yes began panicking. Nathan posted a shaky statement on the community site saying the rule would be reviewed and that no offense was intended. But Maya didn't stop there. She reached out to the local firefighter association and arranged for a small awareness event at the pool next weekend, open to all, featuring stories of service, recovery, and resilience. Flyers went up. The OOA had no grounds to deny it, and everyone knew it. By Friday, Karen's power was unraveling. A neighbor who used to fawn over her told me in the driveway, "She really messed up this time. People are mad, like actually mad." I just nodded and said, "She lit a match in the wrong firehouse." Maya returned home that night more focused than I'd ever seen her. She didn't want revenge. She wanted to shine a spotlight so bright that people like Karen couldn't hide behind their clipboards anymore. I asked if she was nervous about the event. She looked at me and smiled. "No, this is who I am. I've walked through fire for strangers. Now I'm just standing in the sun, and if that burns her pride, so be it." The sun was already climbing by the time we pulled into the lot outside the pool on Saturday morning. A crowd had gathered before the gates even opened. What was once a tranquil poolside retreat had turned into the epicenter of a story bigger than any of us imagined. What Karen thought would be a quiet humiliation buried under HOA red tape was now front-page news. Banners hung on the fences with messages like "Support our heroes" and "Scars show strength." Fire trucks from 3 nearby stations were parked visibly along the curb, and off-duty firefighters in uniform mingled with families holding small American flags and children wearing plastic helmets that said "Junior Responder." Maya stood near the entrance in full dress uniform, stoic but warm, shaking hands and answering every thank you with a nod and a modest smile. She had never wanted attention. She didn't care for applause, but she understood the power of standing tall, not for herself, but for everyone who came after her: veterans, first responders, burn survivors, anyone who had ever been told their presence was uncomfortable. Karen hadn't just insulted Maya. She had insulted resilience itself. Jade, the reporter who broke the story, arrived with a camera crew. She turned her original segment into a full series on public space discrimination. Her crew interviewed parents, neighbors, and firefighters, all of them echoing the same sentiment. We didn't realize how easily one voice could be drowned out until now. When it came time for Maya to speak, the crowd quieted instantly. She stepped up onto a small podium set up beside the pool gate, cleared her throat, and without reading from notes began to speak. "My name is Captain Maya Torres. I've served with the city fire department for over 15 years. I've pulled people from collapsed buildings, carried families out of burning homes, and buried brothers and sisters I ran into fire with. I have scars, yes, scars from heat, from smoke, from falling beams and broken glass. But I am not ashamed of them. They are reminders that I chose to help when others needed it most. The crowd was silent, many nodding. A woman near the back wiped tears from her eyes as Maya continued. Last week, someone decided those scars were too disturbing for a community pool. They decided that what I look like was more important than who I am. But scars aren't ugly. They are proof of survival. They're history etched in skin, and they are never, ever a reason to silence someone. There was a beat of silence. Then the first clap came from a young boy near the front wearing a firefighter hat almost too big for his head. Then the applause spread like wildfire, roaring across the pool area. Some people stood, some hugged each other. Even a few of the HOA board members who had shown up with tight collars and nervous expressions began to clap. But Karen was nowhere to be seen, or so we thought. She showed up late, pushing through the side gate with sunglasses so large they looked like a disguise, dressed in a conservative white blouse and clutching her infamous clipboard. She seemed shocked to see the size of the crowd. She stopped cold as she realized not a single person turned to greet her. Not a wave, not a smile, just a wall of people ignoring her presence like she was invisible. A few residents stepped in front of her path, not aggressively, just enough to block her view of the stage. Karen tried to speak to one of the board members, but he turned away without answering. She wasn't just being avoided, she was being frozen out. Her authority, once unchallenged, had dissolved under the heat of public scrutiny. The queen of the HOA now stood without a crown, without a court, and very much without power. After the speech, the event turned celebratory. Firefighters grilled hot dogs, kids raced around with water balloons, and neighbors mingled with a sense of camaraderie that hadn't existed here in years. It wasn't just a show of support, it was a reclamation of space, of pride, of unity. Maya didn't linger in the spotlight. She took photos with a few fans, answered questions for the local news, then quietly slipped away to the edge of the pool, where she sat with her feet in the water, letting the moment wash over her. I sat beside her and handed her a soda. "Think this will finally shut Karen up?" I asked. She chuckled. "Karen doesn't shut up, but now nobody's listening." That wasn't entirely true. Karen, in fact, was still trying to be heard. That same night, she went live on a community Facebook group, ranting about how she was the real victim and claiming she was being publicly targeted by radical forces. The video went viral for all the wrong reasons. A comment section that once might have supported her now flooded with mockery, disbelief, and calls for her resignation. Someone even looped her "publicly targeted by radical forces" line into a remix that started circulating on TikTok with dancing cartoon flames. What had started as an HOA complaint had turned into a full-blown PR disaster for Karen. It didn't help when a retired fire marshal posted a public statement revealing that Karen once filed a noise complaint against an emergency training drill held in the neighborhood park. The image of her standing in opposition to first responders cemented her new reputation as the ultimate suburban villain. By Monday, the local mayor had made a statement praising Maya's strength and announcing plans to review local HOA regulations that might allow such incidents to repeat. The story had made national headlines now. News stations from other states picked it up as a human interest piece. Heroes shamed at pool sparks national outrage. Meanwhile, Maya returned to work like nothing happened. She was called into a senior strategy meeting and offered a position as public liaison to the fire commissioner. She hesitated at first, but ultimately agreed. "If I can help make sure no one goes through what I did," she said, "then it's worth it." Karen, meanwhile, received a formal notice from the HOA's legal team. Multiple residents had filed ethics complaints and violations of power, citing misuse of authority and discriminatory practices. The board scheduled a vote of no confidence. Karen tried to play it down, but it was clear her reign was crumbling. The same clipboard she once wielded like a sword now sat unused, its papers curling at the edges under the weight of her collapse. Maya didn't want revenge. She never did, but watching her calmly sit poolside as her community rose to its feet around her, as Karen's empire of fear cracked at the foundation, was something I'll never forget, not because it was loud or vengeful, but because it was quiet, resilient, righteous. The kind of victory that doesn't need to shout. It just stands in the sun and lets the truth do the burning. By the time Thursday rolled around, the HOA board could no longer pretend the situation wasn't an inferno smoldering beneath their feet. Their inboxes were flooded, their community threads hijacked by furious neighbors and concerned outsiders, and their own president, Nathan, looked like he hadn't slept in a week. The petition had gained traction faster than anyone anticipated. It started with one resident, a young nurse whose father was also a burn survivor, circulating a call to remove Karen from her self-appointed role and reform the board's decision-making process. Within 48 hours, it had over 80% of the neighborhood signatures. That wasn't just noise. That was legal force. That was change knocking on the boardroom door with a battering ram. Karen, on the other hand, still walked around like she was untouchable. She wore oversized sunglasses even indoors now, as if hiding her face would hide the mess she created. But she couldn't dodge the stares anymore. At the local market, people turned away. At her yoga class, the instructor quietly suggested she take some time off. Her former allies on the board stopped responding to her texts. Even her closest neighbor, the one she once boasted about recruiting to her beautification squad, refused to make eye contact when they crossed paths. The final spark came when one of the residents uncovered a financial report buried deep in the HOA archive. Karen had authorized a discretionary expense to upgrade the neighborhood security system. On paper, it sounded like extra lighting and updated gate codes, but in reality, it included private surveillance cameras, one of which was angled suspiciously toward Maya's backyard. That discovery broke the dam. Maya hadn't even known she was being watched like that, and when the footage surfaced showing Karen zooming in from her phone app on Maya's back porch, the community lost its last shred of patience. A hastily arranged emergency board meeting was called, and this time, over 60 people showed up. The room was packed, standing room only, with people spilling out into the hallway and taking notes for the neighbors who couldn't make it. Karen arrived late again, perhaps hoping to make a dramatic entrance, but nobody clapped, nobody smiled, and when she tried to take her usual front row seat, someone was already sitting there. She stood awkwardly for a moment before slinking to the back, where even the plastic chairs seemed to recoil at her presence. Nathan opened the meeting with shaking hands and a visible gulp. "We're here to address the formal complaints brought against board member Karen Aldridge. Due to the overwhelming petition response and evidence submitted, the board will consider a vote of no confidence and potential removal." Karen shot to her feet before anyone else could speak. "This is a smear campaign," she snapped. "A witch hunt driven by online bullies and people who hate community standards." The room groaned. One man, a retired Army medic, stood up and said, "Lady, you picked a fight with a fire captain. That's not a witch hunt. That's you lighting your own broomstick on fire." Laughter rippled through the crowd, but Karen didn't back down. She paced the front of the room like she was giving a political rally no one asked for. "I acted in the best interests of this neighborhood. I was protecting families from visual trauma, from unnecessary exposure." "That's called bigotry," someone shouted. Karen raised her voice. "I was enforcing existing rules." "No," Maya said quietly, rising from her seat near the wall. "You were making up your own rules, and you were punishing people for surviving." Every head turned toward Maya. She wore her department polo, her badge clipped to the collar, and her posture calm but unflinching. "You watched me. You harassed me. You tried to erase me from a community I pay dues to and serve when I'm off duty, and you did it not because of anything I did, but because of how I look. That's not community service. That's control." Karen tried to interrupt, but the room was no longer hers. The board members leaned in, exchanged nods, and Nathan finally took a deep breath. Based on the evidence, the formal complaints, the verified misuse of funds, and behavior inconsistent with community values, we are moving to vote. All in favor of removing Karen Aldridge from all positions and placing her under full HOA ethics review. Hands shot up across the board. It wasn't even close. Unanimous. Karen stood frozen, lips parted, stunned that her kingdom had collapsed in one motion. "You can't do this," she whispered. "We just did," said Derek, the youngest board member, who then stood and removed Karen's nameplate from the table and dropped it into a box beside the podium. Karen stormed out, but the only sound following her was the creak of the door and a single ironic clap from the back of the room. A few people chuckled. No one stopped her. No one looked sorry. The board continued the meeting with a new tone. Revisions were proposed to safeguard against future abuse of power. Language was added to the HOA charter affirming inclusion and protection for all residents regardless of appearance, injury, or medical condition. Maya was invited to help draft the wording, and she accepted, not out of vengeance, but because she knew that scars weren't just hers. They belonged to every person who carried pain and survival into the public eye and were told to hide it. The next weekend, the neighborhood held its first all-community potluck in over a year. Everyone was invited. No gatekeeping, no rules about lawn chairs or food color themes, just people gathering under the string lights near the pool, passing casseroles and stories and laughing again like they had something real to celebrate. Maya and I arrived late. She wore a sleeveless sundress for the first time since the incident, her scars visible in the fading daylight. Nobody flinched. A few kids ran past us with sparklers. A firefighter from her station handed her a soda and raised a toast. To standing tall. She smiled. To staying visible. That night, she stood beside the pool, the same one where Karen had tried to shame her out of existence, and watched her reflection ripple in the water. It was peaceful and hers. Karen hadn't been seen since the vote. Her house sat dark most nights. Some said she'd gone to stay with family. Others claimed she was still watching the Facebook group through a burner account, leaving cryptic emoji comments that no one responded to. But the truth was, her power didn't just vanish. It had been taken back by neighbors, by unity, and most of all, by a fire captain who refused to shrink. Because when you try to shame someone who's walked through flames and lived, you're bound to get burned. The final board meeting of the quarter was scheduled for a Thursday evening, and though the agenda claimed it would be a routine discussion of landscaping budgets and maintenance scheduling, everyone knew the real reason the room was packed to the walls. There were no open seats, no murmurs of HOA fees or lawn violations this time. The community was here for closure. After months of tension, a public battle, a scandal that went national, and the spectacular downfall of the HOA's most notorious enforcer, people were ready to exhale. It wasn't just about Karen anymore. It was about reclaiming the peace she trampled. Maya and I walked into the room together, hand in hand. She wasn't in uniform this time. No badge, no department insignia, just her usual quiet strength wrapped in a denim jacket and jeans. Her scars were still visible, but this time no one looked away. If anything, people looked longer, not in pity or discomfort, but in respect, because they weren't just scars anymore. They were symbols, emblems of what this community had endured and, more importantly, overcome. Nathan opened the meeting, looking more relaxed than he had in months. He had clearly aged during the ordeal, but there was a spark of gratitude in his voice that hadn't been there before. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the way this community has come together during what's been a very challenging season, he said. We faced division, but we found our way back to something stronger. Today, we're moving forward not just in rules, but in values. The room gave a soft round of applause, not the forced kind, but the kind that builds naturally when people know they've weathered something hard together. Then Nathan gestured to Maya. We'd like to invite Captain Torres to the front for a special recognition. Maya hesitated just for a breath, then made her way to the podium. The same podium where Karen once stood wagging her clipboard now served as a platform for something infinitely better. Nathan handed her a plaque, simple, elegant, engraved with her name and the words, "For courage, service, and the strength to stand tall." Maya didn't speak long. She didn't need to. I didn't ask for this fight, she said. I didn't want to be the center of any story, but I also couldn't stand by while someone used fear and shame as a tool. We're all neighbors. We don't have to agree on everything, but we do have to stand up for each other when it matters. And it mattered. She stepped down to a standing ovation. I don't think anyone in that room had ever seen an HOA meeting turn into a moment of collective pride, but there it was, honest, earned, and unforgettable. The reforms passed that evening with unanimous vote. The board adopted new language protecting all residents from discrimination based on medical conditions or physical appearance. They established a committee for inclusivity and resilience, chaired by none other than Maya, though she insisted it be a rotating position shared by volunteers from the neighborhood. It wasn't about titles or power for her. It never was. It was about accountability and legacy. As the meeting ended, the real celebration began. A few residents had organized a small after-event in the courtyard behind the rec center. Someone brought a speaker, and music started playing softly under the evening sky. Neighbors who barely spoke before were laughing together, trading stories, sharing drinks and memories that went deeper than their front lawns. It felt like the kind of place everyone hopes a neighborhood can be, the kind that Karen had tried to fake with rules and appearances, but Maya had helped build through truth and strength. Somewhere in the back, kids ran around with glow sticks and juice boxes. A group of firefighters from Maya's station had shown up in their casual clothes, blending into the crowd like distant relatives at a family reunion. They didn't need to make a scene. Their presence alone said enough. Respect isn't loud. It just shows up and stands beside you. I found Maya sitting by the fire pit, a gentle smile on her face as she watched the flames crackle. The irony of fire bringing warmth instead of pain wasn't lost on either of us. I handed her a cup of cider and sat beside her. "Do you think she's watching this?" I asked. "She's probably watching everything," Maya replied, "but I don't think she understands any of it." "Good," I said. "She doesn't deserve to." Maya shrugged. "Everyone deserves a chance to change, but not everyone takes it." The moment was quiet, honest, and for the first time in months, it felt like everything had settled, not because justice had been screamed into the void, but because it had been lived, because the truth had been carried day after day without giving in to hate, because Maya had stood when others might have hidden, because instead of revenge, she chose to lead. A week later, a bronze plaque was installed near the pool. It wasn't grand or flashy, just a sturdy marker set into stone that read, "Dedicated to the heroes among us, seen and unseen. This space belongs to all." Underneath was Maya's name, along with the names of 2 other local responders who had also been injured in the line of duty. It wasn't about her. It was about legacy, about memory, about putting something permanent where once there was only pain. Karen never returned to another board meeting. Her house went on the market 3 weeks later. The listing didn't mention the scandal, but it didn't need to. Reputation travels faster than property value. And while she disappeared into silence, Maya's story kept spreading across online forums, news features, even fire department recruitment campaigns. Not because she sought the spotlight, but because she had become something bigger than one neighborhood squabble. She had become a reminder that strength doesn't always roar, that some people bear their battles on the outside, that scars, whether visible or not, are not meant to be hidden, but honored, and that sometimes the best way to win is not to fight fire with fire, but to let your truth burn bright enough to light the way for others.